Bom dia, comunidade. O meu nome é Emi. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui com todos vós. Muito obrigada pelo seu tempo e atenção. Bem, isso é praticamente todo o que consigo dizer em português com esse sotaque terrível. Por isso, vou continuar em inglês. Obrigada outra vez. If you understandably didn't understand anything I just said, I'm just so thrilled to be here. It's my first time in Porto, and I'm already so inspired by the surf community here. I want to thank Afonso and the entire team for putting together this incredible festival, and thank you all for coming. Before I dive into our work engaging youth in fishing communities for sustainable, or how we like to say, epic futures, I'd first like to do a little thought experiment with you all. I know that we just met, and this might be a bit heavy, but when you hear the phrase global challenges, what sort of comes to mind or what emotions arise? We won't stay here too long because unfortunately there are a lot of places our minds can go. Maybe you're thinking about climate change, biodiversity loss, or feeling sick about the genocides or political polarization of our societies, or maybe something closer to home like the housing crisis due partly because of people with a similar accent to mine. Sorry about that. We're going through a really rough time at the moment, which I think has been established. This recent study asked people to name the global challenges that they see and then connected the dots. It's hard to read the details, but what matters here is the big picture. It sort of looks like this spider web, which sort of makes sense that we all feel a bit anxious and maybe stuck in the middle, like there's no way out. I promise the talk gets a little more hopeful from here. Second, what comes to mind or emotions arise when you hear the word sustainability? Did anyone feel overwhelmingly hopeful just now? You can raise your hand. Okay, not many of us. And I feel a little disillusioned when I hear the word sustainability these days. And it sort of makes sense why. A recent study asked people what they thought of when they hear the word sustainability, and most people ranked solar panels or wind energy, followed by the classic recycling symbol, and then some green new policy. All good things, surely, but with that narrow definition or sense of sustainability, it's sort of hard to imagine how that alone could ever untangle us from that spider web we just saw. Okay, last one. What comes to mind or heart when you hear the word enchantment? By enchantment, I mean that awe-filled sense of wonder we experience when we're watching an incredible sunset, or biting into a delicious sandwich, or being held by someone we love, or maybe dropping into a barrel and the morning light is just coming through the lip of the wave and you're just going out with a spray and it's like, and you're just stoked. Something fascinating actually happens in our brains when we experience enchantment. Time seems to slow down. In our brain, we process it more slowly. We feel more connected to something greater than ourselves, more generous, and we switch our focus from material things to the quality of our experiences, all in that moment of enchantment. So I argue that in order to get ourselves out of those global challenges, we need to cultivate more experiences of enchantment to reach real sustainability. Because wonder actually rewires our brains from the ego system to the ecosystem, and that changes how we relate to one another. And through our relationships, we have the power to reshape the structural and material world around us. To me, surfing is one of the most enchanting practices we have for that kind of self to system transformation. So if you take one thing away from my talk today, it is that you need to surf more, like all of our lives depend on it, intentionally, and I will explain why. So the classical definition of sustainability is development that meets the needs of the present generation without jeopardizing the needs of the ability of the future generation to meet their needs. So the focus here is on needs. But what do we mean by needs? Well, whether it's food, water, security, or love, it's all what we consider important to us, or what we value. Our values shape our needs, and then from our needs, we are motivated to act. Then our actions lead to our experiences, and our experiences either reinforce, challenge, or transform our values. And our values are created inside a larger system, and through those relationships inside that system, we determine what we believe we need to live a good life. So again, if we look back to the definition of sustainability, there's a focus on needs. But what if the dominant forces in our society shaping our needs aren't actually what we need to live a good life? I shall explain. So 20 years ago, researchers published the U-curve of happiness, finding that life satisfaction rises in youth, dips in midlife, the midlife crisis, and then rises again after 50. But today, that curve looks more like a J because younger generations, the 18 to 25-year-olds, are reporting lower levels of happiness than those in their 50s. So what changed? Well, apart from the global anxieties, young people today are feeling anxious about school, constantly comparing themselves on social media, and also feeling lonely even while always connected online. New research suggests that actually happiness is derived from the quality of our relationships with ourselves, one another, and the environment. But we are the generation that is spending much more time indoors, behind screens, less time face-to-face, and we all, but especially young people, become more vulnerable to shaping values based on the system behind those screens. And that system, in my humble opinion, is capitalism, an economic model that is criticized for valuing profits over people. So we end up telling ourselves things like, I need to be more productive to have worth, or I need to consume more to feel secure. But as the J curve shows us, actually rising consumerism has led to despair. So why are we pouring our energy into finding greener ways to meet the same old needs if that isn't actually what we need to live a good life? And what does it mean to even live a good life? I think the answer to that question can be found in our experiences, because our experiences are our interactions with the world, and therefore lay the foundation for those authentic relationships that we need, that the researchers say lead to a better life. So you're maybe wondering, okay, lady, what does this have to do with surfing? Well, I think we can all agree that surfing is one of the most epic experiences we can have. But maybe how many of you have felt while riding a wave that you're simultaneously in right relationship with yourself and everything everywhere all at once, even if it's just for that wave? Now imagine not just one of us, but a whole community of us feels stoked. If enchantment really does rewire our brains, then that changes how we begin to relate to one another. And through those relationships, we can actually reshape the world and get ourselves out of those global challenges that we thought about. And so this is really at the heart of this idea called quantum social change, which is a concept this researcher, Karen O'Brien, explores, which links our personal development to systemic change, using metaphors from quantum physics. So particles in quantum physics can become entangled with one another, and quantum social change imagines us as these little particles. So I think it's easy to understand quantum physics if you think as a surfer. So imagine surfers in the lineup, and one person's decision to go or not go on a wave affects everybody else in the lineup. So that's not unlike us and our values, which shape our daily actions, which then have a ripple effect to shape an entire system. So with quantum social change, the idea is that our relationships, our entanglements, if they are rooted in a just and sustainable way, that can lead to an epic future. And that is what we try to do through our nonprofit, Coast to Coast. And we are a community-based organization that weaves together investigation with imagination and immersion to work with learners and educators in fishing villages to explore their social, ecological surroundings and build caring relationships through the power of enchantment to shape epic futures. So through youth action research approaches, we work with students to gather, illustrate, and mobilize intergenerational knowledge rooted in their experiences in the form of their own professional stop-motion animations, comics, murals, maps, and more. Through surfing, swimming, and wild ocean play, we work with kids to develop inner to outer strength, and then those connections between themselves, their peers, their community, and the aquatic environment. The secret sauce to all of this is awe, that moment of, wow, that is so cool, because those awesome experiences cultivate these universal values of creativity, curiosity, and care, which then influence interactions, which can then influence an entire system. So I will show you an example of this from the kids from the Shaka Surf Club. Por favor, Miguel.
Cody Bang, it was a beautiful morning. The fisherman want to go fishing. He bring fishing rod and fishing. There was a big fish that got to the net. He's so happy. Yippee! Surfer boy and surfer girl want to go surfing. There was a big wave. They're surfing and enjoying. This is so fun. Under the sea, garbage and collecting, there was a big demon cave. His name is Garbage Man. Oh, he was so hungry, he catched so many fish and eaten all the fish. Fisherman got so many fish. He's so happy. There was a garbage man come back, destroy the boat and eat the fish. Help me! Somebody help me! Surfers, please help me! The garbage monster is destroying me. We are coming to rescue. Don't worry. Fisherman will destroy the garbage man. Yeah! Kachak! Oh no! Thank you, Surfer. You are a good hero. Now we can be a friend.
So as you can see, the kids came up with the story, they made the sound effects, and then they edited the film with us. Thank you. Yes, for the kids. So my earliest experiences of enchantment I owe to my parents, especially my dad, who was a lifeguard and taught me how to surf at a young age. I grew up in San Diego, California, actually a town with deep Portuguese roots. In 1542, the Portuguese explorer Cabrillo was the first European to set foot on the west coast of the United States when he sailed into San Diego Harbor. And then in that same harbor, centuries later, 160 Portuguese fishing families turned San Diego into the tuna capital of the world. So thank you for that. But then now the US imports 90% of our seafood, so San Diego's known more now for its tourism and its waves. I grew up longboarding and dreaming of becoming a professional surfer, partly because I realized as someone who is neurodivergent that I was better at surfing than I was at school. I had a lot of anxiety in the classroom. But when the US invaded Iraq and Afghanistan in high school, I felt this sudden urgency to understand and respond to what was going on around me. One spring, I joined my high school to cross the border over into Mexico, and volunteer in a community that was living in a landfill. And I remember walking around this community, mountains of trash, and looking over the border wall and actually seeing my own neighborhood. And whatever sort of privileged bubble I was living in just popped in that moment. So I thought, I will be a diplomat. Surely those are the people who fix the problems. So astonishingly, I got into the Foreign Service School in Washington, D.C., which was a surprise to everyone, especially myself. And I left California. It was my first time leaving California and living in snow. A few months in, I had a series of panic attacks, and I decided to take a year off. So I moved back to California with a terrible haircut and dark hair, feeling very low about my life, did a bunch of odd jobs, and actually started interning with the US Navy as a marine mammal trainer, as one does when they are lost in life. The next summer, still feeling pretty low, a friend convinced me to apply for an English teaching position at an orphanage in Nepal that was attached to a Buddhist monastery. Our first day on the job, the monks handed us a book on the solar system and asked if we could teach astronomy instead. And our second question was, in English. So we actually spent the whole summer making paper spaceships that traveled the galaxy. And it was my first time understanding that, learning can actually be fun and it doesn't have to be stressful and in this classical system. So I became really passionate about facilitating those experiences for others, but also myself. One night in Kathmandu, I met a group of skateboarders that were from this organization called Skateistan that were using skateboarding as a tool to engage at-risk girls in Afghanistan. It's the first time I heard of this concept of sports for development. And I thought, I wonder if anyone is doing that with surfing. So I went back to university and I started researching and found surf clubs in Peru, South Africa, and India that were doing exactly that. And I even got in touch with a very cool professor who's sitting in the back row there and is going to speak after me, who's also exploring surfing and sustainability. I bought a book, How to Form a Nonprofit for Dummies, and I read the first 5 pages, got excited, and launched Beyond the Surface, a nonprofit network that was designed to connect these clubs together and amplify their work. Ironically, I got sponsored by Billabong, signing my contract in my dorm room in Washington, D.C., but used that money to jumpstart the NGO. So during the school year, I would fundraise, and then during the summers, thanks to Billabong, I actually got to go on the ground and work with these communities. The first summer, I went to Lobitos, to Waves for Development, and I would never have imagined that 16 years later, I now live in Lobitos, and the kids that were once in this program are now the directors of the nonprofit. The next summer, I went to South Africa, where I worked with Umtombo, now called Surfers Not Street Children. And it's basically a safe space for kids experiencing homelessness. If they stay clear from drugs, then they have access to surfboards. So surfing's the incentive. After I graduated, I moved to India, where I worked with the Kovalam Surf Club, which is attached to CISP, which is a second chance education center that motivates kids to stay in school through surfing. I also worked with the Shaka Surf Club, co-founded by my dear friend Ishita, who's sitting just over there. She's going to speak tomorrow. I'm giving plugs for everybody. The Shaka Surf Club is an epic surf school, but also acts as this kind of after-school space where kids can come and hang out and have this intercultural exchange. Also, while in India, I joined this traveling circus for water sanitation and hygiene. I was in charge of a booth where kids could come and shine this blue light on their hands and see the germs on their hands light up. But it backfired because then after the kids washed their hands with soap, their hands stopped lighting up and they felt extremely cheated. So the circus really taught me that, okay, these games that you design outside actually need to be designed with communities, and trust needs to be established first. With a surf program, although it can take time, once it's established, trust builds quite quickly. Because parents grant you their children, you take them into the ocean, which for many cultures is a scary place. You bring them back alive and then happier when they left the house. So that builds a lot of trust, and positive change can only move at the speed of trust. So families started inviting me over for food. Here we are celebrating Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, with some families from the Shaka Surf Club. While in India, I was also invited with Ishita to be part of a documentary highlighting surfing in India named after the nonprofit. It followed a group of women, mostly foreigners. They explored surfing along the coastline and met the kids from the different clubs. The Kovalam Surf Club kids, most of them do not have birth certificates or official records. So when we screened the part of them surfing at their school, they were starstruck by themselves. There was evidence of their existence, not as these impoverished kids, but as these epic groms. And that really taught me the importance of storytelling and authorship. So around that time, the directors of Waves invited me back to Peru to really explore how does one create film with local communities to tell their own stories. And that workshop was being led by a very impressive and rather good-looking Peruvian filmmaker named Nico, who's sitting just over there. Nico had a bunch of participatory media projects traveling all over Peru, and we decided to team up and merge our projects together into Coast to Coast. And without wanting to sound cheesy or puroso, it turned a little bit into a love story. So we began traveling around the coast and partnering with local schools and nonprofits in seaside villages from Mexico to Colombia, eventually made it back to India. We would give kids cameras so they could highlight what they loved most about their community, but also the challenges they face. And then we would work with them to effectively communicate that work. While in Indonesia, we worked with an after-school program that while one group of students was surfing, another group went on assignment photographing parts of their community. One little girl took a picture of her grandmother enjoying a plate of rice and fried fish. She captioned her photo, "Rice and fish are best friends, but fish doesn't come around as much anymore, and that makes rice and me very sad." I remember looking at Nico and thinking, like, oh my God, all of these communities in our programs are actually fishing villages. Like, this little girl's talking about food security. So in a way, they're like little researchers daylighting these nuanced but global challenges. So small-scale fishing communities are really characterized by using small boats, traditional selective fishing gear, usually leaving enough for the ocean to replenish. They are a lifeline for millions. So if you imagine the entire population of Canada, the US, and Mexico combined, all of North America, that is the amount of people who rely on small-scale fisheries for their cash and calories. So if you can think about it, from our human history, we've always located, settled near water, so whether a river, a lake, or an ocean, and have built a deep cultural connection with those aquatic worlds. And from there, some universal values like interdependence and reciprocity linked to well-being. But today, in a changing climate and industrializing society, the well-being of these small-scale fishing communities is rapidly eroding, just like their coastlines. There are far less fish and way more problems. So I decided to go back to school to earn my master's in marine biodiversity and conservation to better understand how I could support the families in our programs and what does it mean to be a fishing village in today's world. The biggest challenge that I saw was this idea of youth disenchantment. So if we imagine all those global challenges we thought about before, add in cyclones, oil spills, and dwindling fish stocks, coastal communities are really hit hard. And for the first time in generations, families are actively discouraging their kids from pursuing fishing, which as a result, the kids are relating less and less to their environment. Meanwhile, thanks to digital connectivity, they're spending more time indoors and behind screens, absorbing content that's geared towards more urban audiences that promotes these internalized capitalistic values, while rural schools are really just pushing them out to leave, meaning fueling depopulation, which makes it easier for industrial expansion. So really, what becomes of a fishing village without fish or villagers? I doubt a marine protected area. So if really small-scale fishing communities can survive and their communities thrive, I think youth need these enchanting learning experiences to really have an opportunity to learn about their relationships, cultivate them, and then design these epic futures that are honoring their own aspirations. So whether they want to become fishermen or a lawyer or a mototaxi driver, they still have these universal values that are fostered through these experiences that follow them everywhere and still link them to the well-being of their communities. So this is a little bit of what those experiences look like. Por favor, Miguel. Well, the kids actually made the lyrics to the song, helped with the music, and produced the idea for the stop motion animation. So, concretely, how does this create change? Well, it doesn't happen overnight, and after over a decade of doing this work, we're just starting to see glimpses of it in our community. So Lobitos is located just south from the once famous Cabo Blanco Fishing Club, once a playground for Hollywood stars like Marilyn Monroe or writers like Ernest Hemingway, who got inspiration there for The Old Man and the Sea. Lobitos is located just south, and it was the first oil camp established by British and American companies. The fishing community was established around the camp. But in the 1970s, Peru's military dictator kicked the foreigners out and nationalized oil, and the fishing village came under military control and was further marginalized. Today, Lobitos still looks like a ghost town, but after the 1998 El Nino shifted the sands, it became a surfer's paradise. So one of our first stop-motion animations in this community was co-created with two kids named Ivan and Alexis. Given free range to come up with whatever story they wanted, they created the character Alex Van, who starred in an animation about him as this incredible football player who gets signed by the head coach of the Barcelona team, flown out to play in an intergalactic football match to save the universe, which, of course, he does by winning and becoming a superhero, all as a kid from Lobitos. We created this stop motion 10 years ago. Fast forward to last December. Lobitos experienced one of the most devastating oil spills. If you can imagine, from where we are here all the way to the city of Porto, that was just covered in crude oil, the whole coastline. It accumulated at this cultural heritage site called the Capullanas. The oil company hired local kids to go clean the oil up without proper safety gear, no masks, no goggles, for less than 10 euros a day. The community was outraged, and we protested, and we closed the entrance to the community. So the oil company came to have a town hall, and in attendance was Ivan, freshly graduated from university, who came with a printed law in his hands. And when Nico gave him the microphone, he clearly explained that we as a community had the right to form our own environmental monitoring committee to collect evidence and demand proper compensation. Filming him that day was Alexis, who now worked for the municipality as a communications officer. So the oil company came back to sign an act with the mayor, sitting right there looking very stressed, and at the table sat Ivan as the newly formed founder of this environmental committee. Now Ivan leads this committee along with other young people in Lobitos. In a recent webinar with the UN, Ivan clearly explained how these early learning experiences, whether surfing or stop motion animation, prepared him to problem solve and find his voice. So I think it goes to show that when kids grow up imagining local superheroes, they can become them themselves. This is also speaking to the point that kids need to know their rights. So this is a very important UN document, a little bit boring, but very important human rights document aimed to design laws. It's called the Voluntary Guidelines for the Small-Scale Fisheries. So laws created with these fishing communities in mind for their human rights. So together with Yvonne and other young people, we're piloting a curriculum that allows kids to explore their community using these guidelines and look at them as these wonderful social ecological systems and design their futures. The idea for this project came out of a National Geographic funded project in Vietnam, where we worked actually with a water sports center called Manta that was training local fishermen as surf and sailing instructors, engaging local school groups while providing free classes to the local kids. So with the UN, we were invited to be part of this research project to see how local communities could monitor if these guidelines were actually being implemented. So we got to use the stand-up paddleboards from Manta. We'd go out to talk to the fishing families and get kids interested in joining this research, including over 50 primary school students. So we would go to the fish markets and explore the guidelines, whether gender equity or looking at sustainable resource use. And at the end, we held a photo exhibition for the parents to come and discover through their children's eyes these guidelines and their ideas for the future. there they are looking at how these actually work, designed by the kids, this little graphic. So incredibly, the community's research was published actually in this UN white paper called Involving the People. From that project came the idea that, well, what if we turned these kind of boring guidelines that are important into this dynamic curriculum? So during the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, we worked with rural classrooms from coast to coast to actually design these activities. So working with kids in Madagascar, to Nigeria, to the kids in the Kovalam Surf Club in India, and also at our local school in Lobitos. So we designed these games that were rooted in the kids' local context. And also through our traveling school festival, Somos Mar, we would go and pilot these lesson plans where the school walls are transformed into these murals of local biodiversity, but also paired with the fishing regulations to understand how to care for that biodiversity. We also created stop motion animations looking at the value chain of a fish's journey from ocean to plate, and even stop motion animations about tenure rights, looking at how community legends serve as evidence for their right to participate in conversations around that space as the local stakeholders. We also piloted the activities in the Amazon rainforest with indigenous communities like the Yanesha to see how they would apply to inland fisheries. Throughout this process, it became very clear that we needed to carve out more space for girls to express their opinions. So we launched Women in Water, and the year that we had the most funding for our all-girls surf program was the year of the oil spill that closed all of our beaches. So we asked the girls, what do you want to do instead? And they said, maybe we could learn to swim first. So we piled them into a van and we went to the local pool. And it was incredible to see them gain trust in themselves, one another, and the water. Eventually, we made our way back to the ocean. And honestly, seeing these girls tackle their fears and express themselves in the waves has been one of the greatest joys of my life. So I would like to end with them, our Serenas Capullanas, because when children and young people have the opportunity to have these enchanting learning experiences, they don't just lead or care or love their world, but they become the storytellers. They are the protagonists of the change. I'd like to end with them.
Mi fondo del mar, todo se mueve sin parar. Corrientes que me envuelven, como que si me quisieran atrapar. Me jalan hacia abajo, no puedo respirar.
Desde la orilla las veo levantarse. Son olas tan grandes y gigantes.
Entonces, una sombra lo cubre todo a su paso. Nadie escapa de su abrazo. Cangrejos, persebres y peces de negro se tiñen en el ocaso.
¿Y a mi papá? ¿Qué se va a pescar? El mar también se lo quiere tragar. Se lo lleva con sus redes, con su bote, y no lo quiere soltar.
Cuando me subí a la tabla por primera vez, sentí miedo, pero también fuerza. Yo no creía que podría surfear. Tenía miedo y pensaba que con las olas grandes me iba a ahogar. Poco a poco le voy perdiendo miedo al mar. Confío cada vez más en mí misma y me siento feliz de surfear, nadar o cualquier cosa que me proponga. Las profesoras son como nuestras amigas, pero un poquito más grandes. Me han hecho sentir segura de pararme en la tabla porque antes yo no quería, y a no tenerle miedo a las olas porque ellas no nos hacen nada. Hoy me he cogido 8 olas con Daniela y Emi y me he sentido épica.
El mar es mucho más que un espacio para aprender a surfear. Es un espacio de conexión, de amistad y también de confianza. Es un lugar donde las chicas construyen su fuerza interna, como vencer sus miedos, construir autoestima, confianza en sí misma, y también construyen su fuerza externa. Hacen ejercicios en la playa, meten a nadar y también surfean.
Hola, mi nombre es Fernanda y estoy feliz porque ya estoy aprendiendo poco a poco a surfear.
Pude meterme un poco más al fondo, vencí mis miedos.
Me ayudó a confiar en mí misma y a surfear algunas olas. Me he llevado una ola bien grandes con mi tío Henry.
Les doy gracias a ellas que aunque hagan algunos revolcones, igual vuelven a confiar en nosotros para volver a intentarlo.
Ahí vamos parándonos poco a poco.
También afuera del mar, en paralelo, estamos empezando a construir una comunidad de mujeres, como una cultura femenina, pues donde hay tanto apoyo entre ellas y también están acompañándose en su crecimiento. Es increíble lo que pasa cuando un grupo de mujeres se junta y conecta con sí misma y la naturaleza.
Cuando estamos juntas en el agua, yo siento una emoción muy grande estar con mis amigas, porque cuando estamos en el agua parecemos sirenas capullanas y lo somos.
Me encanta hacer nuevos amigos, amigas sobre todo, porque cuando llegué acá a Lobitos no había muchas mujeres, era como que me juntaba más con los niños. Pero cuando hicieron las clases de mujeres y agua, de verdad agradezco mucho. Ahí me empecé a juntar con un montón de niñas, podías hablar de lo que quisieras y ahí te escuchaban, estaban a tu lado, había mucha fuerza.
Cuando una niña se sube por primera vez a una tabla, no es solamente un deporte, es un mundo de oportunidades que se le abren. En este programa no solamente surfeamos, también hablamos del territorio y la comunidad, y de lo que significa vivir cerca del mar y cuidarla.
¿Qué haría para proteger el mar, la ola, el sistema de surf, para que viva la gente, todo lo que hemos hablado?
El mar es muy bonito, donde viven los animales, como peces, tortugas y lobos marinos. Es su casa y también la nuestra. Gracias al mar, mi abuelo y mi papá pueden pescar. Vienen turistas y podemos surfear. Qué suerte de tener el mar tan cerquita de nosotras.
A través de talleres aprenden sobre sus derechos, conservación y turismo, y el valor que tienen sus olas. Las niñas están aprendiendo con sus manos, con su cuerpo y con el corazón.
Hicimos un taller de música y ahí nos enseñaron a tocar la guitarra, y también hicimos una canción que trató sobre el derrame del petróleo, y ahí aprendí que ya no habían animalitos porque se morían por el petróleo y los pescadores ya no podían pescar. Y también grabamos un video de pelícanas superheroínas donde yo también participé y aprendimos mucho sobre lo que es cuidar nuestra playa.
Yo soy de Lobitos y ver cómo estas niñas, muchas de ellas hijas de pescadores como yo, se animan a preguntar, a crear a contar sus historias, es muy emocionante para mí.
Mi papá es pescador y ahora yo también quiero cuidar este lugar tan especial.
Hace unas semanas nos fuimos a Yapato e hicimos una limpieza de playa porque la playa estaba súper sucia, con mucho plástico, muchas bolsas. Así que con el grupo de Mujeres y Agua empezamos a juntar la basura, aprendimos un poco de la contaminación que hacen también de las playas.
El cine, el casino y más cosas ya están destruidas.
No sabía que nuestro pueblo era tan bonito y tenía tanta historia hasta que empezamos a explorarlo juntas. Hemos recorrido Barrio Primavera, Barrio Militar, la iglesia, el cine, pero el lugar que más me ha gustado ha sido La Bola porque nunca he subido y he podido ver todos los lobitos y me he dado cuenta que es hermoso. Me siento orgullosa de ser de Lobitos, tener el mar y ser parte de esa comunidad.
Conozco a varias de estas niñas desde hace un buen tiempo y lo que veo ahora es increíble. La magia que se está formando es maravillosa. Las niñas han creado un grupo unido, lleno de energía y sobre todo que tienen muchas ganas de aprender. En un lugar donde enfrentamos muchas problemáticas, su energía, su imaginación y esta manera de divertirse, de transformar estos problemas en soluciones, es esperanzador para un futuro lleno de cambios positivos.
Hoy día nos hemos juntado aquí para hacer un mural. Vamos a tratar de abarcar las 4 paredes.
Fue un regalo para nuestra comunidad y a la vez expresábamos todo lo que sentíamos. Yo me sentía tan alegre en pintar este mural porque conviví con todas mis compañeras, jugamos con pintura. Me expresé a través del arte en un mural tan grande que para nosotros fue nuestra primera vez y estábamos tan alegres de que lo expresamos y quisimos hacerlo lo mejor que podíamos.
Hoy día he pintado una sirena gigante en la pared y me siento feliz. Hoy dibujé una sirena capullana y me siento épica.
Espero y inspiro a demás niñas o mujeres o adolescentes a alzar la voz y decir sus emociones.
Una vez que llegó el proyecto de Mujeres y Agua, ella evolucionó. Hemos visto con los padres de familia los diferentes cambios de las demás niñas.
Mi pequeña ha mejorado su autoestima, ha aprendido a valorarse más y a quererse tal cual ella es.
En ella veo una confianza enorme, al igual que me ayuda bastante en soltarla, porque ella se va como adaptando más a otras personas, va conociendo nuevas amigas. Se asocian muchas niñas de diferentes barrios, ¿no? Empiezan a ellas a conocerse más, se sienten libres, ¿no? Libres como mujeres.
Poco a poco van soltándose, demuestran un poco más sus emociones. Es un ambiente muy acogedor.
Y la verdad, muchísimas gracias, estoy muy agradecida por haber venido Mujeres al Agua y espero que siga y que nunca se termine.
Porque vamos a salir Le vamos a dar a continuación un pequeñísimo pedazo de todo lo que hemos vivido. Esperemos que les encante tanto como a nosotros nos gustó ser parte de Mujeres y Agua.
Si pudiéramos viajar en su profundidad, veríamos una fiesta entre esquifes y amistad. Juntas poder nadar como sirenas del mar, y los pescadores atraerían más sueños para abrazar.
Thank you. The 2 songs you heard today are on Spotify, actually. We're on Spotify. And here's the little QR thing to follow us on Instagram if you like. Thank you all so much. Muito obrigada.